The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood at her bedroom window. Her fingers traced the cool glass while she watched the gardeners tend to the roses below. These same roses had bloomed for decades, witnessing countless royal moments, but today felt different. Today carried the weight of an ending that nobody saw coming. William emerged from their private bathroom, his face drawn with exhaustion. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of private meetings, hushed conversations, and sleepless nights. The decision they had reached wasn't made lightly, but it was final. After years of serving the crown with unwavering dedication, they had chosen a path that would shock the world. "The children are asking questions," Catherine said softly, not turning from the window. "George mentioned that Papa seems sad lately. Charlotte noticed I've been crying." William moved to stand behind his wife, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. The reflection in the window showed two people who had aged beyond their years, carrying burdens that the public could never fully understand. "We'll tell them today after breakfast. They deserve to hear it from us before anyone else." The weight of their decision had been building for months. What started as quiet discussions about their future had evolved into something neither had anticipated. The constant scrutiny, the endless obligations, and the toll it was taking on their family had reached a breaking point. They had given their all to the monarchy, but now it was time to give their all to each other and their children. Catherine finally turned to face her husband, seeing the same resolve in his eyes that had carried them through their courtship, wedding, and early years of marriage. "Do you think they'll understand? The public, I mean. After everything we've been through together." William cupped her face in his hands, his thumb gently wiping away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "Some will, some won't, but Kate, we can't live our lives for their understanding anymore. We've given them 12 years of our lives, our privacy, our freedom. Now we need to give our children the chance to choose their own paths." The decision to step back from royal duties hadn't come suddenly. It had been brewing since George's 10th birthday, when photographers had followed him to school despite palace requests for privacy. Charlotte had started asking why she couldn't have normal playdates without security details. Louis, still young and innocent, had begun to notice that other families didn't have their pictures taken every time they left the house. "I keep thinking about that day at the beach last summer," Catherine said, settling into the armchair by the window. "Do you remember? We found that little cove where no one could see us, and the children just played. Really played. Without worrying about cameras or proper behavior or representing the crown." William nodded, remembering how George had built sandcastles without concern for getting his clothes dirty. How Charlotte had chased seagulls with pure joy. How Louis had fallen asleep in Catherine's arms without a care in the world. They were just children that day, not future kings and princesses. Just our babies. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on their door. "Mama, Papa?" George's voice carried the uncertainty that had become common in recent weeks. "Mrs. Thompson says breakfast is ready." "We'll be right there, sweetheart," Catherine called back, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. She and William exchanged a look that spoke volumes. This was it, the beginning of the most difficult conversation they'd ever have with their children, and perhaps the most important decision they'd ever make as parents. As they prepared to leave their private sanctuary, Catherine took one last look around the room that had been their refuge for so many years. The photographs on the dresser told the story of their journey together, their engagement announcement, wedding day, the births of their children, countless royal engagements. Each image captured a moment in time when they believed they could balance their duty to the crown with their duty to their family. "No regrets?" William asked, offering his hand. Catherine took it without hesitation. "No regrets about putting our family first. Never." Together, they walked toward the dining room where their children waited, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The decision to step away from royal life wasn't about abandoning their responsibilities. It was about redefining them. Their greatest responsibility wasn't to the crown or the public. It was to George, Charlotte, and Louis. The palace staff had noticed the change in atmosphere over the past few weeks. Conversations stopped when certain people entered rooms. Private meetings ran longer than usual. The Duke and Duchess seemed more thoughtful, more deliberate in their interactions. But none of them suspected the magnitude of what was coming. As they reached the breakfast room, Catherine paused to straighten William's tie. a gesture so natural and intimate that it spoke to the foundation of their partnership. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together just as they had from the very beginning. Their love story had captured the world's imagination, and now it was time to write the next chapter on their own terms. The breakfast room felt unusually quiet as the family gathered around the polished mahogany table. George sat properly in his chair, his posture reflecting years of gentle guidance about royal protocol. Charlotte hummed softly while spreading jam on her toast, her natural exuberance barely contained by the formal setting. Louis, still small enough to need a booster seat, swung his legs happily while attempting to cut his pancakes with determination that far exceeded his coordination. Catherine watched her children with a mixture of love and heartbreak. These precious moments of normalcy had become increasingly rare as the children grew older and their roles within the royal family became more defined. George, in particular, had begun to understand the weight of his future responsibilities, and she could see it in the way he sometimes hesitated before speaking, as if measuring his words for public consumption. "Children," William began, his voice gentle but serious enough to capture their attention immediately. "Mama and I need to talk with you about something very important." George looked up first, his dark eyes so much like his father's, already showing wisdom beyond his years. "Is it about the photographers again? The ones who were at school yesterday?" The question hit both parents like a physical blow. George shouldn't have to think about photographers at 10 years old. He shouldn't have to worry about whether his friends' parents wanted playdates because they genuinely liked him or because they wanted access to royal circles. In a way, yes, Catherine said, reaching across the table to take George's hand. "But it's bigger than that, sweetheart. Your father and I have made a decision about our family's future." Charlotte stopped humming, sensing the gravity in her mother's tone. "Are we moving houses again? I like our room here." "No, darling, we're not moving," William assured her, "but we are going to make some changes to how we live our lives. Big changes that will affect all of us." The next few minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of love and explanation. William and Catherine had rehearsed this conversation in their minds countless times, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of seeing their children's faces as they began to understand. "You know how Papa has to go to many official events, and Mama has to make speeches and visit different places for work?" Catherine began, keeping her voice steady and age-appropriate. All three children nodded. They had grown up understanding that their parents' work was different from other parents, that sometimes important duties meant missing bedtime stories or family dinners. "Well, we've decided that we want to spend more time being just a family. We want to be able to take you to school ourselves every day, to go on holidays without having to tell everyone where we're going, to have friends over without worrying about security or photographers." George's brow furrowed as he processed this information. "But Papa, don't you want to be a prince anymore?" The innocence of the question nearly undid William's composure. "I'll always be a prince, George. That's something that can never change. But being a prince doesn't have to mean doing royal duties every single day. It can mean choosing to focus on what matters most, our family." Charlotte, ever perceptive, picked up on something her parents hadn't explicitly stated. "Will people be angry with us?" Catherine's heart clenched. Her 7-year-old daughter shouldn't have to worry about public opinion or the feelings of strangers. "Some people might not understand at first, sweetie. Change can be scary for everyone, even grown-ups. But the people who truly care about us will support our decision." Louis, who had been listening with the focused attention that small children bring to serious conversations, suddenly piped up. "Does this mean no more fancy dresses, Mama?" The question broke some of the tension in the room, and Catherine couldn't help but smile. "I think I'll still have some fancy dresses, Louis, but maybe not quite so many. Can we get a dog now?" George asked, his practical mind already moving to the possibilities this change might bring. "A real dog that lives with us all the time, not just one we visit?" William and Catherine exchanged a look of amazement. Their children, resilient and adaptable as always, were already seeing the potential benefits rather than dwelling on what they might be losing. "Yes," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can get a dog. We can do lots of things we haven't been able to do before." The conversation continued for another hour, with questions ranging from the practical, "Will we still live in our house?" to the profound, "Will Gungun be sad?" William and Catherine answered each query with honesty appropriate to their children's ages, explaining that the Queen had actually been very understanding when they discussed their decision with her privately. She told us that being a good parent is the most important job anyone can have, Catherine shared. And she said that she's proud of us for putting you three first. As breakfast concluded and the children dispersed to their various activities, George to his tutoring session, Charlotte to art class, and Louis to play with his nanny, William and Catherine remained at the table. The hardest part was over, but the most challenging part lay ahead, telling the world. They took it better than I expected, William observed, watching Louis race his toy cars across the floor of the adjoining playroom. They're strong, Catherine replied, stronger than we give them credit for. They've inherited the best parts of both our families, your sense of duty and my determination, but also a wisdom that will serve them well. The afternoon would bring meetings with private secretaries, communications teams, and senior palace officials. Statements would need to be crafted, logistics arranged, and protocols followed even in their departure from protocol. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of their family conversation, William and Catherine allowed themselves a moment to breathe. I love you, William said simply, reaching for his wife's hand across the table. I love you too, she replied, and I love them enough to give them the chance at a different kind of life. Outside the breakfast room windows, the world continued its normal rhythm, unaware that everything was about to change for the family that had captured its heart more than a decade ago. The palace corridors had never felt longer as William and Catherine made their way to the Queen's private study. Each step echoed with the weight of tradition and the uncertainty of change. Palace staff they passed offered respectful nods, unaware that they were witnessing history in the making. The quiet walk of two people about to reshape the very foundations of their lives, and potentially the monarchy itself. Queen Elizabeth. She sat behind her mahogany desk, the same desk where she had signed countless state papers, received prime ministers, and made decisions that shaped nations. But today, she was simply a grandmother listening to the most difficult conversation her grandson had ever initiated. Your Majesty, William began, using the formal address that had been drilled into him since childhood, even in private family moments. Catherine and I have come to a decision that we know will surprise you, and we wanted you to hear it from us personally before it becomes public. The Queen's expression remained composed, but her hands, folded carefully on the desk, betrayed a slight tension. At 96, she had weathered countless storms, family crises, and constitutional challenges. She had seen abdications, divorces, scandals, and triumphs, yet something in her grandson's tone suggested this was different. Please sit, she said quietly, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk, and speak freely. Catherine felt her heart racing as she settled into the familiar chair where she had sat for countless family discussions over the years. This room had witnessed her integration into the royal family, watched her grow from a nervous young woman into a confident duchess. Now it would witness her departure from active royal life. We've decided to step back from our royal duties, William said, the words hanging in the air like a confession. Not permanently and not entirely, but significantly. We want to focus on raising our children with more privacy, more normalcy. We want to give them choices we never had. The silence that followed felt eternal. The Queen's face revealed nothing, a skill perfected over 7 decades of public service. Catherine found herself studying the family photographs scattered across the side table. Images of happier, simpler times when the weight of duty felt lighter and the future seemed more certain. Tell me about the children, the Queen said finally, her voice softer than her official tone. How are they handling the pressures? It was the question that opened the floodgates. Catherine spoke about George's increasing anxiety about his future role, how he had started asking if he could give the crown to someone else when he grew up. She described Charlotte's tears when photographers followed her to a friend's birthday party, how the little girl had asked why she couldn't just be regular Charlotte instead of Princess Charlotte. And Louis, William added, his voice breaking slightly. He's starting to notice that other children don't have bodyguards following them to the playground. He asked me last week if it was because he was bad. The Queen listened without interruption, her expression growing more thoughtful with each revelation. When they finished, she stood slowly and walked to the window overlooking the gardens where William had played as a child, where his own father had learned the weight of royal responsibility. I have spent my entire life in service to this nation, she said, still looking out the window. I was 25 when I became queen, thrust into a role I never expected to inherit so young. I have watched my children struggle with the balance between duty and personal happiness. I have seen marriages crumble under the pressure, watched my grandchildren grapple with expectations they never chose. She turned back to face them, and for the first time in their conversation, Catherine saw not the queen, but simply a great-grandmother concerned for her family's well-being. The monarchy will survive, she continued. It has survived far greater challenges than this. But what matters more to me in this moment is that my great-grandchildren grow up knowing they are loved for who they are, not what they represent. William felt a wave of relief so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. He had expected disappointment, perhaps even anger. Instead, he found understanding from the one person whose opinion mattered most. However, the queen added, her tone becoming more formal, this decision will have consequences. The press will be relentless. The public will have opinions. There will be those who see this as abandonment of duty, others who see it as selfish. Catherine leaned forward slightly. We understand that, Your Majesty. We've thought about little else for months, but we believe that being good parents is also a form of duty, perhaps the most important one. Your mother would be proud, the Queen said to William, referencing Diana with a gentleness that brought tears to his eyes. She always put you and Harry first even when it was difficult, even when it cost her. The conversation continued for another hour, covering practical matters, timelines, and the delicate process of public announcement. The Queen shared her own experiences of choosing between personal desires and royal obligations, offering wisdom that could only come from a lifetime of service and sacrifice. There is one thing I must ask, she said as their meeting drew to a close. This decision, is it truly what you both want, or are you running from something? William and Catherine exchanged a look that spoke of countless conversations, sleepless nights, and careful consideration. We're not running from anything, Gun, William said, using the childhood name that brought a small smile to her face. We're running toward something, toward the family we want to be, the parents we need to be. Then you have my blessing, the Queen said simply, and my support, whatever form that needs to take. As they prepared to leave, the Queen called Catherine back. You know, she said privately, when I was your age, there were days I envied the women who could simply be wives and mothers, who could put their children's scraped knees before state dinners. You have the chance to be both the Duchess who served her country and the mother who chose her family. That's not a failure. That's evolution. Walking back through the corridors, William and Catherine felt lighter than they had in months. The hardest conversation was behind them, and ahead lay the challenging but liberating process of crafting their new life. The Queen's blessing had been more than they had dared hope for, and her understanding felt like a gift. One more conversation, Catherine said as they reached their private apartments. Then we'd tell the world. That conversation would be with Charles, William's father and the heir to the throne. It would be different from the discussion with the Queen, more complex, more fraught with implications for the future of the monarchy. But for now, they had taken the most important step. They had chosen their path forward together. The phone call to Charles came that evening, after the children had been tucked into bed and the palace had settled into its quiet, nighttime rhythm. William sat in his study, Catherine beside him on the sofa as he dialed his father's private number. They both knew this conversation would be far more complicated than the one with the Queen. William, Charles's voice came through clearly, warm but tinged with the exhaustion that had become his constant companion, since taking on more responsibilities as his mother aged. I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. Is everything all right? Dad, we need to talk. Catherine and I have made a decision that affects the family, and I want you to hear it from us directly. The pause that followed was telling. Charles had survived enough family crises to recognize the tone that preceded life-changing announcements. I see. Should I be sitting down for this? Probably, William said, trying to inject some lightness into his voice while Catherine squeezed his free hand for support. Over the next 20 minutes, William and Catherine outlined their decision, their reasoning, and their timeline. Unlike the Queen's thoughtful silence, Charles's responses were immediate and emotional. There were expressions of shock, attempts at persuasion, and moments of genuine distress as he processed what this meant for the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. "You understand what this means?" Charles said, his voice strained. "The succession, the workload, the public perception. You're not just stepping back from your duties. You're fundamentally altering the future of the monarchy." "We understand that, Dad," William replied. "But we also understand what it means to watch our children struggle with pressures they never asked for. George is 10 years old and already worried about disappointing the nation. That's not childhood. That's a burden no child should carry." Catherine leaned closer to the phone. "Charles, we're not abandoning our responsibilities entirely. We're reshaping them. We want to focus on causes that matter to us, work that we can do with more freedom and less protocol. We can still serve, just differently." The conversation revealed the fundamental tension that had been building for years. Charles, who had waited his entire life to become king, couldn't fully comprehend choosing to step away from royal duty. William, who had grown up watching his mother struggle with the constraints of royal life, couldn't comprehend not making that choice for his own children. "Your mother," Charles said quietly. "She would have understood this decision, wouldn't she?" The reference to Diana changed the tone of the conversation entirely. William felt the familiar ache that still accompanied thoughts of his mother, but also a clarity about his path forward. "Yes, Dad. I think she would have been proud of us for putting the children first. She used to tell me," Charles continued, his voice softer now, "that her greatest fear wasn't the paparazzi or the pressure. It was that you and Harry would grow up feeling trapped by a role you never chose. She wanted you to have choices." Catherine felt tears welling up as she listened to this glimpse into Diana's private thoughts. She had often wondered what William's mother would have thought of their decision, whether she would have supported their desire for a more private life for their children. "The irony," Charles said with a bitter laugh, "is that I spent decades wishing I could step back, focus on my passions, live a quieter life. But duty always came first. Always. And now you're choosing differently." "It's not that we don't understand duty, Dad," William said earnestly. "We've given 12 years of our lives to royal service. We've traveled the world, supported hundreds of charities, represented the crown with pride. But we've also learned that duty to family is just as important as duty to country." The conversation took an unexpected turn when Charles began sharing his own struggles with balancing fatherhood and royal obligations. He spoke about missing William and Harry's school plays because of state dinners, about feeling like he knew his sons through newspaper reports rather than daily interaction. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "you're doing what I should have done, what I was too bound by tradition to do." By the end of their call, Charles hadn't given his blessing in the same way the Queen had, but he had given something perhaps more valuable: his understanding. He acknowledged that the monarchy needed to evolve, that each generation had to find its own way of serving. "There will be challenges," he warned them. "The press will be brutal initially. There will be criticism from traditionalists, questions about commitment and duty. But if this is truly what you believe is best for your family, then I support you." After they hung up, William and Catherine sat in the quiet of their study, processing the emotional weight of the day. 3 of the most important conversations of their lives were now complete. Their children, the Queen, and Charles all knew about their decision. "Tomorrow we tell the staff," Catherine said, thinking about the loyal palace employees who had become like family over the years. "That might be harder than anything we've done so far." William nodded, knowing she was right. The palace staff had devoted their careers to supporting the royal family. Some had worked there for decades, had watched William grow up, had been present for his wedding and the births of his children. Telling them about this change would be deeply personal. "Mrs. Thompson has been with us since George was born," Catherine continued, thinking about their beloved housekeeper. "She's going to cry." "They all are," William agreed. "But maybe some of them will understand. Maybe some of them have watched us struggle and wondered if there was another way." The next morning would bring the carefully orchestrated process of informing key staff members, private secretaries, and communications teams. Press statements would need to be drafted and redrafted, legal implications considered, logistics planned. But tonight they allowed themselves to simply be grateful for the support they had received from the people who mattered most. "No matter what happens next," Catherine said, curling up against her husband's side, "we made the right choice." The only choice we could live with, William agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Outside their study windows, London continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that the royal family they had followed for years was about to change forever. In a few days, the world would know what William and Catherine had decided. But for now, in the quiet of their private moment, they were simply a husband and wife who had chosen love over duty, family over protocol, and their children's future over their own past. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and drizzly, as if the weather itself reflected the somber mood that had settled over the palace. In the communications office, teams of press secretaries worked frantically to finalize the statement that would change everything. Every word had been scrutinized, every phrase carefully chosen to convey respect for the monarchy, while explaining their deeply personal decision. Catherine stood before her dressing room mirror, selecting what would likely be her final outfit as a working member of the royal family. She chose a simple navy dress, elegant but not overly formal, appropriate but not ceremonial. It felt symbolic somehow, this last moment of dressing for duty rather than simply for herself. The statement is ready for your final approval. Simon Case, their private secretary, announced as he entered William's office. His usually calm demeanor showed cracks of stress from the intense week of preparation. The Prime Minister has been briefed, Commonwealth realms have been notified, and we have a comprehensive media strategy in place. William read through the statement one final time, Catherine looking over his shoulder. The words seemed inadequate to capture the depth of their decision, yet they would have to suffice. After much consideration and reflection, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have decided to step back from their roles as senior working members of the royal family. This decision has been made with deep respect for Her Majesty the Queen and the institution of the monarchy, and with an unwavering commitment to their children and family life. They will continue to support charitable causes close to their hearts while pursuing a more private life that allows them to focus on raising their children away from the intense public scrutiny that has defined their lives thus far. It's time, William said quietly, nodding to Simon. At exactly 2 p.m., the statement was released simultaneously across all official channels. Within minutes, news organizations around the world began breaking the story. The palace switchboard was immediately overwhelmed with calls from journalists, well-wishers, and critics. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from heartfelt support to harsh criticism. In their private apartments, William and Catherine watched the initial coverage with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The children were at their lessons, blissfully unaware that their names were trending worldwide, and their parents' decision was dominating every news cycle. Royal shock. William and Kate stepped back, flashed across the BBC news ticker. Sky News had assembled a panel of royal correspondents, constitutional experts, and former palace staff to dissect every aspect of the announcement. American networks interrupted regular programming to cover what they were calling the biggest royal story since Diana's death. The reactions were as varied as William and Catherine had expected. Traditional monarchists expressed disappointment and concern about the precedent being set. Younger commentators praised them for prioritizing mental health and family life. Parents around the world shared stories of their own struggles to balance career ambitions with family responsibilities. "Look at this," Catherine said, scrolling through social media on her phone. A mother in Canada wrote that she cried reading our statement because she recognized the impossible choice between being present for your children and fulfilling professional obligations, but not all reactions were supportive. Several prominent newspapers ran editorials questioning their commitment and sense of duty. One particularly harsh columnist wrote about the selfishness of privilege and abandoning the people who supported them. Each critical piece stung, even though they had prepared for this response. The most difficult moment came when Charlotte returned from her art lesson, her face confused and slightly upset.
"Mama, my teacher asked me if it was true that we weren't going to be royals anymore."
I didn't know what to say. Catherine knelt down to her daughter's eye level, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "You will always be a princess, sweetheart. That never changes. What's changing is that we won't have to do quite so many official jobs, which means we'll have more time to spend together as a family." "But I liked some of the official jobs," Charlotte said with the honesty that only children possess. "I liked visiting the hospitals and seeing the dogs at the charity events." The comment hit both parents powerfully. In their focus on protecting their children from the negative aspects of royal life, they had perhaps overlooked how much the children had also embraced some of the positive elements. "We can still do some of those things," William assured her. "We'll just choose more carefully which ones we do, so we have more time for regular family activities too." As the day progressed, messages of support began arriving from unexpected sources. Harry and Meghan released a statement expressing their understanding and support. Several other royal cousins privately reached out with encouraging words. Most surprisingly, a letter arrived from a former private secretary who had served 3 generations of royals, expressing his admiration for their courage. The Queen's official response, released through Buckingham Palace that evening, was brief but powerful. "The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have served the Crown with distinction and dedication. Her Majesty understands and supports their decision to prioritize their family while continuing to serve in a reduced capacity. The royal family remains united in love and mutual respect." That evening, after the children were asleep, William and Catherine sat together in their garden, away from the phones and computers and constant stream of reactions. The initial storm had passed, but they knew the coming weeks would bring continued scrutiny and judgment. "Do you think we'll regret this?" Catherine asked, voicing the fear that had been lurking beneath their conviction. William considered the question seriously before answering. "I think we might regret some individual moments, missing certain events, disappointing certain people, but I don't think we'll ever regret choosing our children's well-being over public expectation." The next morning would bring the first of many interviews, carefully planned media appearances designed to explain their decision in their own words. They would face skeptical journalists, disappointed supporters, and curious observers. But they would also begin the process of building the life they had chosen. One where Sunday mornings could be spent in pajamas, where school events took priority over state dinners, where their children could simply be children. "Whatever happens next," Catherine said, taking William's hand as they watched the stars appear in the darkening sky, "we faced the hardest day together." "The first day of the rest of our lives," William replied, squeezing her hand gently. Inside the palace, staff members were already adapting to the new reality. Calendars were being cleared, engagements canceled or reassigned, protocols adjusted. The monarchy would continue, but it would be different. And in their quiet garden, a husband and wife who had chosen love over duty sat together, ready to face whatever came next. 3 weeks after the announcement, the reality of their new life was beginning to take shape. The initial media frenzy had settled into a steady stream of speculation and analysis, but the intense daily scrutiny that had defined their lives for over a decade was noticeably diminished. For the first time in years, Catherine was able to walk through Hyde Park with Louis without causing a crowd to gather. The transition wasn't without its challenges. George had struggled with explaining the change to his classmates, some of whom had made comments that revealed their parents' opinions about the decision. Charlotte had asked several times if they had done something wrong to make people angry, but there were also unexpected joys, like the morning William was able to drive George to school himself without a security convoy, and watch his son run into the building like any other child. "Mrs. Thompson cried again yesterday," Catherine told William as they shared breakfast in their private kitchen, a smaller, more intimate space they had rarely used when official duties dominated their schedule. But they were happy tears this time. "She said she's excited to cook family dinners instead of formal entertaining menus." The palace staff had adapted with remarkable grace. Some had chosen to transfer to other royal households, understanding that their specialized skills in protocol and formal events were no longer needed. Others had embraced the chance to support a more relaxed family environment. The children's nanny had confided that she was relieved to focus on childhood development rather than public appearance training. The public reaction continued to evolve. Initial polls had shown the country divided, but as weeks passed, support seemed to be growing, particularly among younger demographics and parents. A particularly moving moment came when a video went viral of a young father at a protest, holding a sign that read, "William and Kate chose their children. I choose mine too." "Look at this letter," Catherine said, holding up a handwritten note that had arrived in the morning's mail. "It's from a military wife whose husband missed their daughter's birth because of deployment. She says our decision gave her permission to ask for family leave when her second child is born." The correspondence had been overwhelming in its volume and emotional impact. Letters from parents who felt trapped between career demands and family needs. From children of public figures who understood the burden of living in the spotlight. From people around the world who saw their decision as an example of courage rather than failure. But perhaps the most significant change was visible in their children. George's nightmares about disappointing the nation had stopped. Charlotte was sleeping better, no longer waking up worried about photographers. Louis had started asking for playdates with school friends, something he had rarely requested before. "Can we get the dog now?" George asked one morning. The question that had become a daily refrain since their family discussion 3 weeks earlier. "Actually," William said, exchanging a knowing look with Catherine, "we thought we might visit the animal shelter this afternoon. Just to look." The squeals of delight from all 3 children were worth every critical newspaper editorial and skeptical opinion poll. These were the moments they had chosen, the everyday magic of family, life that they had been missing while fulfilling their royal obligations. The visit to the animal shelter was their first significant public outing since the announcement. They had chosen a local rescue organization, one that Catherine had quietly supported for years. The photographers who followed them maintained a respectful distance, perhaps sensing that this family outing deserved privacy. "That one," Charlotte declared decisively, pointing to a golden retriever mix who had been gently playing with Louis. "She likes us. What should we call her?" William asked, watching as the dog seemed to naturally gravitate toward their family. "Hope," George said immediately, with the wisdom that sometimes comes from children, "because that's what this feels like." The symbolism wasn't lost on either parent. Hope, for a different kind of life, for their children's futures, for the possibility that love and family could coexist with duty and service, just in a different way. As they completed the adoption paperwork, Catherine overheard one of the shelter volunteers telling another family, "Even royals rescue dogs instead of buying them. That says something about their values." The drive home was filled with excited chatter about dog beds, toys, and walking schedules. Hope sat quietly in Catherine's lap, seeming to understand that she was joining something special. The children took turns gently petting her, already planning adventures they would share. "This feels like the beginning," William said quietly to Catherine as they pulled through the palace gates for what might be one of the last times as working royals. That evening, as they watched their children play with Hope in the garden, while security officers smiled from their discreet positions, Catherine felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. The criticism hadn't stopped, the challenges of their transition weren't over, and there would be difficult days ahead. But they had chosen correctly. "No regrets?" William asked, echoing the question that had become their touchstone. "Only that we waited so long," Catherine replied, watching Charlotte teach Hope to sit while George threw a ball and Louis clapped enthusiastically at every successful catch. The next phase of their journey would involve finding a new home, establishing new routines, and defining what their reduced royal role would look like. William would continue his work with mental health initiatives and conservation efforts, but on his own terms. Catherine would pursue her interests in early childhood development and photography, but with the freedom to say no to obligations that took her away from family. "The hardest part is over," Catherine said as they prepared for bed. Hope already settled in a basket next to George's room, as if she had always belonged there. "No," William corrected gently. "The best part is just beginning." Outside their windows, London hummed with its usual energy, but inside their home, a family had found its way back to what mattered most. The fairy tale was ending, but the real story of love, sacrifice, and choosing what matters most was just beginning to unfold. 6 months had passed since the announcement that changed everything. The family had settled into their new home in Norfolk, a comfortable country house that felt more like a refuge than a royal residence. The children attended local schools. William worked part-time as an air ambulance pilot, and Catherine had returned to her photography, capturing moments of ordinary beauty that the constraints of royal protocol had never allowed her to explore. The transformation was visible in every aspect of their lives. George had joined the school football team and spoke eagerly about matches and friendships, without the weight of royal responsibility clouding his conversations. Charlotte had discovered a love for horseback riding, spending hours at the local stables where she was simply another enthusiastic young rider. Louis had blossomed in his new environment, his natural exuberance no longer tempered by the need for perfect public behavior. "Mama, look what I drew," Charlotte said, running into the kitchen with a watercolor painting. It showed their family, including Hope, standing in front of their new house under a bright sun. No crowns, no formal poses, just a family enjoying a beautiful day. "It's perfect, sweetheart," Catherine said, genuinely moved by the freedom and joy evident in her daughter's artwork. The painting would join dozens of others, covering their refrigerator, a gallery of childhood, creativity that had never been possible in the formal palace environment. The public perception had gradually shifted as well. Initial criticism had given way to a grudging respect for their commitment to family values. When photos emerged of William shopping for groceries with the children, or Catherine attending a school play without fanfare, the narrative began to change. They weren't abandoning duty, they were redefining it. "The Mental Health Foundation called again," William told Catherine as they sat in their garden, watching the children play with Hope. "They want me to speak at their annual conference, but it would mean 2 days away from home." It was the kind of decision they now approached together, weighing every invitation against its impact on family time. The foundation's work aligned perfectly with William's passions, and the cause was deeply meaningful to him. But they had learned to say no to good opportunities in service of great family moments. "What does your heart tell you?" Catherine asked, using the question that had become their guide for all decisions. "That the work matters, but not more than being home for George's match on Saturday or Charlotte's recital on Sunday. Then we find another way to support them," Catherine said simply. "Maybe a video message or a written statement. The children will only be young once." It was this kind of conversation that had become the foundation of their new life. Every choice was filtered through the lens of family first, understanding that their greatest contribution to the world might be raising children who felt loved, secure and free to choose their own paths. The Queen visited them twice, arriving without fanfare in a simple car, rather than the state vehicles that had once announced royal presence. She spent her time playing board games with the children, walking Hope through the countryside, and sharing quiet conversations with William and Catherine about the evolution of duty in modern times. "You know," she had said during her last visit, "watching your children simply be children reminds me why the monarchy exists at all. It's not about the institution. It's about serving something larger than ourselves. You're serving your family, and through them you're serving the future." The most profound change was in William and Catherine's relationship with each other. The constant pressure of royal obligations had created a distance between them that they hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. Now they had time for morning conversations over coffee, evening walks through their village, and spontaneous decisions to take the children on adventures. "Remember when we had to plan a simple family outing 6 weeks in advance?" Catherine laughed as they decided on a whim to drive to the coast for fish and chips. "Now we can just go." "Best decision we ever made," William said, watching George help Louis with his seatbelt while Charlotte gave Hope a reassuring pat. The drive to the seaside was filled with singing, silly games, and the kind of unguarded family interaction that had been impossible under constant public scrutiny. When they arrived at the small coastal village, they were recognized by a few people, but the response was warm rather than intrusive. They were no longer objects of intense curiosity. They had become a family that people respected for making a difficult choice. As they sat on the beach, watching their children build sandcastles while Hope chased seagulls, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The criticism had been difficult, the adjustment challenging, but the peace she felt in this moment confirmed that they had chosen correctly. "Any regrets?" William asked, the question that had become their traditional check-in during moments of transition. "Only one," Catherine said, surprising him. "What's that?" "That it took us so long to realize that we could choose differently." The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. George had convinced Louis to help him dig a moat around their elaborate sandcastle, while Charlotte collected shells for decoration. Hope lay contentedly at Catherine's feet, tired from her enthusiastic pursuit of birds. "You know what the best part is?" William said, pulling Catherine closer as they watched their children play. "What?" "They won't remember the palaces or the formal events or the photographers following us everywhere. They'll remember this, the feeling of being completely free to just be themselves." As they packed up their beach picnic and prepared for the drive home, Catherine captured one last photo, not for any official purpose or public consumption, but for their family album. It showed their children silhouetted against the sunset, carefree and joyful, with hope running circles around them. That night, as they tucked their tired, sandy children into bed, George looked up at his father with the clear eyes of a child who had never doubted he was loved above all else. "Papa, are you happy we're not royal anymore?" "We're still royal, George," William said gently. "But more importantly, we're happy. And that's what matters most." In the quiet of their Norfolk home, with their children sleeping peacefully and Hope curled up in her favorite spot by the fireplace, William and Catherine sat together in the comfortable silence of a family at peace. They had given up titles and duties and public adoration, but they had gained something infinitely more precious: the freedom to love their children without compromise, and the time to build memories that would last forever. The fairy tale had ended, but the love story continued, stronger and more authentic than ever before.